So hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It's a collaboration between OneSignal and Yodel Mobile. I'm Meg O'Hearn, the Community Marketing Manager at OneSignal, and I'll be hosting the session today. I'm joined by Megan Dean, who is the Strategic Growth Director at Yodel Mobile, and also with Joshua Hollander, who's our Customer Success Manager, or Head of Customer Success here at OneSignal. And we're here to answer your questions just about getting started and with and refining evergreen engagement and retention campaigns. You also might know these as automated customer journeys. So by evergreen campaigns, we mean just automated campaigns that may be single or multi-channel that are triggered by certain qualities or actions of your users, and you just set them up once and then you can leave them running. So it's a one-time effort and then maybe a little bit of maintenance over time, but you get a lot of benefits from that one-time setup. So these could be something like an onboarding campaign, a campaign to reduce churning users. You get the idea. And it's great because the time you've saved allows you to spend time on other efforts. And in OneSignal, we call these journeys. So let's move on to our questions. I'm going to quickly introduce Megan. Megan, again, is the Strategic Growth Director at Yodel Mobile, the leading app marketing consultancy globally. Megan has 7 years of experience in growth marketing and consulting on specific app growth issues, and a bit more widely in launching and scaling hundreds of apps across all verticals. She specializes in tech stack, data insight, and product in particular. So she's really a true expert, and we're very lucky to have her here answering your questions. So thank you, Megan. We're really happy to have you. I'll hand things over to Megan really quickly to talk a little bit about Yodel.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. So just a really brief rundown on Yodel. I suppose I'm very lucky to work with an incredibly smart team. We have been globally recognized for the work that we do across a really wide range of different work. But I guess, you know, what we say we do is we launch and we scale apps. You can see here, recently we were named ASO Agency of the Year. We've also won Growth Team of the Year, Agency of the Year in the past, and even won, you know, Campaign of the Decade a couple of years ago as well. So, you know, we really cover a very wide range of services. If we go on to the next slide, I guess I can go a little bit more detail into that. So there's kind of 4 key services that we provide. The first one is advanced growth strategy. So this is really focused on product strategy, CRM, data, tech stack, making sure that you're really set up for success and that, you know, everything you're doing focuses around your product and, you know, how you make revenue in the end. We also provide app store optimization. So we really focus on visibility and ranking across your app stores, making sure that, you know, users can find you and that you are converting those users at a high rate. We also run paid user acquisition. So obviously the paid advertising for our clients, this often comes under our launch strategies, and helping clients to really grow sustainably is the key goal. And then heading up kind of and supporting all of that is our mobile creative studio, who support with, you know, ASO listings, paid user acquisition adverts, and CRM assets as well.
Nice if I unmute myself. Thanks, Megan. So with that, let's get to some of the questions that people have asked in advance. So thanks all for sharing your questions. We did receive so many questions that we're not able to answer all of them today, but we will follow up with email on those that we were unable to get to. And we grouped together some of the questions that were very similar so that we're able to answer a little bit more during the session. So as a reminder, we're just going to leave a few minutes at the end of the session today for any questions that come up during the course of the conversation. So as Megan is answering questions and discussing some solutions to those questions, you can feel free to type any additional follow-up questions or related questions that you have in the chat on the webinar module on the right-hand side of your screen. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first set of questions are about, there we go, implementation. So to start, what tech stack do I need to execute the best automated campaigns?
Yes, thank you. And I think this is probably very, very linked to the second question of what other tools do you need to implement on top of OneSignal? So I'll kind of go through those together. In general, when we're launching an app, there are a really wide range of tools that you can consider, but I think there are three which we always consider to be absolutely crucial at the stage of launch and, continuing on from there with your growth. So the first one is an attribution tool. So something like, an AppsFlyer, Adjust, Branch, something like that, which is going to tell you where your users are coming from. This means that before they've reached the App Store and downloaded, we know exactly which of our acquisition channels are performing the best. From there, we need in-app analytics, so something to tell us what users are doing in the product, understand where our drop-off points are, where users are converting really, really well, but really understanding what is it that users are doing inside the app. And then the third one, of course, is a marketing automation tool such as OneSignal, and this would be focused on the communication with the user, building that experience with them and building that bond that you have, which is going to lead to your longer term retention. And all three of these tools really work together to give you a full picture of what users are doing and then be able to act on it as well.
Awesome, thanks. And how long would that implementation usually take?
So I'm going to try really hard throughout these questions not to just answer it depends, because that is always the answer, to be honest. But to give you a ballpark, attribution might take something like 2 days to implement. Your in-app analytics is going to take a little bit longer because this is where you are tracking most of your in-app conversions, your in-app events. You're trying to track in detail what users are doing. So that might take something more like 1 to 2 weeks. And then OneSignal, because we're really setting up just the implementation of the SDK, that can take, less than a day, even as little as 15 minutes if we're not kind of setting up APIs as well. But you can have kind of a functional CRM tool in and running in as little as 15 minutes. I think, it's worth noting as well that OneSignal does kind of integrate with a number of other tools, a lot of different tools, but some of the most popular, especially with in-app analytics, are our mix panels and our amplitudes. They're really, really popular in-app analytics tools in the space, and essentially what that means is it gives us a whole host of data that we can use to personalize our campaigns, make sure that they're targeted, they're going to add value to the user, and all of those integrations are pre-built, so it's really, really easy to set those up for your users.
Great, so let's move on to some questions about execution of evergreen or automated campaigns. The first question, I thought this was a really good one. We're a small fintech nonprofit and we're just dipping our toes into automated customer journeys. Any tips for newbies?
Yes, it is a really good question, and a really broad one as well. So I'm going to touch on just a few different things here, and I'm hoping that having spoken about the implementation area already, it's going to kind of help give some context to how you could do this. I think, the first thing that I would say is start simple and focus on value. We don't want to worry too much about, okay, I need to be optimizing every single day, I need to get 10 campaigns live. That's really going to be different for every single app, what's suitable for your customers. So really what we want to do is, walk before we run, make sure that we're not just chucking a whole load of stuff in and just hoping for the best. As I said, we are very focused on sustainable growth. So it's all about iteration. We need to gather some data, understand what's happening, and then move forward with it. So, some really, really simple campaigns that we might look at are an onboarding series in the first week following sign up. You know, how do we help users to understand what the app does and how they can add value? And also, you know, campaigns triggered when a user's been inactive, sorry, for X amount of time. So maybe that's, you know, a week they haven't come back to the app and we want to bring them back in. We might send them some form of communication. Really though, as I said, we want to focus on the value. So the best way to do this is to really understand your user journey and to map that out in terms of that value. You know, at what point are users going to experience that? So first of all, you know, the first time that they might understand, have a little kind of hint of value, we call it the aha moment, I guess, where, you know, the user goes, okay, this is what the app does. I understand. You know, it might be the first time they get onto your home screen. It might be once they complete the onboarding, whatever it might be, it's that first experience for them. Then we have kind of the next step, which is their first experience of value. So it actually does something for them. You know, again, this might be, you know, an e-commerce, for example, it might be someone favoriting a certain item. It might even be them purchasing that item. And then we really want to focus on habit forming. So from that first point of value, how do we get users coming in back and back and back? And those are just really, really high level, 3 core kind of conversion points that the user goes through. We know what those are. We can then focus our communications around pushing users towards those specific actions and helping them to drive that value. If we're moving, you know, a little bit further down your app life cycle, and we're also, you know, we've collected some data, we understand what users are doing, we can then also split users into different buckets, right? So we can have kind of our casual users who are, you know, they're using it occasionally, but they're not where a lot of our revenue is coming from. We might have our core users who are the ones who really, you know, your average user, these people are doing, they're the majority, they're what you tend to see from lots and lots of different people. And then you always have kind of power users, you know, the really, really engaged ones as well. So we want to kind of understand the differences in those behaviors. And then again, we build that into our milestones for that user journey. And we start to push people towards the specific behaviors that we see drive long-term retention.
Great. So the next question that we have are, which are the best evergreen campaigns to automate? Onboarding after specific events, etc.
Yes, and I think again, you know, this is a big depends question. But as I mentioned before, we have things like onboarding, which are a really good place to start, and you know, churn type campaigns, making sure that someone doesn't leave the app and forget about it. But I think apart from those two, which are kind of, you know, the very beginning of your journey and potentially the very end, really it's going to be very specific to the user. Ideally, what you want is to have them as personalized and as targeted as possible. The more generic the message, the less relevant it is going to be to the user and the less likely they're actually going to convert off the back of it. So ideally, you know, it should be focused on specific events as much as possible. And where we can, we want to be pulling data from our in-app analytics tool to personalize that. So for example, you know, we might find that a fitness app, you know, you might have a really wide range of workouts. I remember we launched a fitness app a while ago and they had different frequencies of workouts. There would be like a 1-week program where you'd do 5 workouts in a week. There'd be a week program where you'd do 3, and so on. And, you know, really understanding which ones users were interested in helped us to understand, okay, like when should we push them and what type of workouts are they also doing? You know, if it's yoga versus weightlifting, we might want to send them different messages which focus on different things and hit different kind of goals that they might be trying to achieve through these different types of workouts.
So the next question, sorry, my mouse is going out of control here, is how many or automations would you normally set up every month?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned before, I think I'm always very against saying, you should do 10 automations a month. It really, really depends on volume of user base, how many users have you got, how complex is your app? Does it do one thing? Does it do a million things? A Facebook, for example, we know has a ton of different features which they're building out all the time. There's going to be a lot more that we would want to re-engage people with than a more simple app. And also the number of different types of user that you have. I guess this links back to the complexity of your app, but do you have lots of different product categories or genres that people are looking at, or is it kind of we're offering one thing and that's kind of what everyone gets? I would say again, starting with a few small campaigns to gather that data is the best way to start. See how they perform and then start to break that down into different types of user. I can come back to my fitness example here where we might have one onboarding journey for everyone, and then when we see it's kind of working, we might split it by, I think at the very simplest is male and female. I wouldn't always suggest that, obviously, but with fitness, it's often quite relevant. And you just keep breaking that down until you have a really kind of personalized journey where everyone feels their experience is unique and valuable.
So final question on execution. What stats should I look for to identify top performing campaigns?
So I think most often people will focus on open rate and click-through rate, which are not unimportant stats. They're kind of the most obvious, right? But not every user converts immediately. I think often we'll see that users will almost use notifications as like a notice board. It's like, okay, that's reminded me, I'll come back later. And we might even see that it very much depends on industry. If you're sending a notification about an offer on something like a top, let's say in e-commerce, it's going to take someone a lot less time to think about it than, for example, a hotel, where that's a much bigger purchase. There's a more investment. You have to do a little bit more research into it. So we also have to think about how long it's actually going to take people to convert. I think the best advice I can give on stats is to integrate OneSignal with your in-app analytics tool. These are two-way integrations. So as well as having your data sent to OneSignal so that you can target your campaigns, you'll also get events sent back from OneSignal saying, notification received, for example, as an event in your analytics. And then that means that you can see, okay, when I didn't have this campaign implemented, how are people converting? Now I can see people have received a notification in the middle of that flow. How does that affect my conversion overall? And it just means that your in-app analytics tool still shows you that full picture on actually, how are people converting? Did they get a notification somewhere in this journey, and did that impact it?
Great, so let's move on to, here we go, some questions about optimization. We have another 3 questions here, and then we'll have some time to take some of the questions that have popped up during the course of the conversation. So for optimization, our first question is, I'm trying to figure out the right amount of messages to send. Too little and we're afraid of losing customers, but too many and it can feel like spam. How do I find the right balance, and is there a method to measure this?
Yeah, so again, I think, we really have to focus on value over frequency here, right? And it really depends on your vertical and the type of behavior that you would expect from a user. So with something like language learning, for example, daily notifications might be okay because we know that, it's a habit forming. The user clearly has an interest in language learning and they know that it's going to take work and commitment to do it. However, going back to an e-commerce example, I would ideally not be shopping every day, right? For clothes, for example. So maybe that would be maybe weekly or monthly, but it's going to be a lot less frequent. Really A/B testing different journeys to understand what frequency works best is the way to do it. And we have to try it incrementally again. If we start with low frequency and then start to build that up, when you start to see the notifications become less effective, that's when you can probably say, okay, we might have too many notifications now. The last thing I would say on this is actually a lot of apps are starting to give users the choice of, how frequently would you like to receive notifications? Was it weekly, monthly, daily? Which really gives you a really clear answer on what that should look like.
Yeah, those are all great indicators. Thank you. So when is the best time to send a message to encourage just an occasional user to come back to an app?
Yeah, so I think ideally we need to personalize this as well, right? So at the very simplest level, let's say we target someone 23 hours after they were last active. That's generally going to be around the time of day where it was the most relevant the last time. You can also use your in-app analytics to get benchmarks for, when are the most active hours of the day across all users. But actually, One Signal makes this really, really easy for you. They have something called intelligent delivery based on 3-month rolling average of the user's past actions. So that means that every user is going to get their notifications based on, when their average most active time has been. And that's always going to convert better than any kind of guess.
Yeah, we've seen some great increases with the use of intelligent delivery, so that's a great thing to add. So final question on optimization. How do you optimize the campaigns in any given month?
Yes, and this is a really broad question. I suppose I've given a few ideas already, but I always come back to looking at your data. Are users converting at a higher rate now than they were before they were receiving those messages? I think you can never underestimate the value of also working through the user journey and trying to get into their head, right? I've worked on a lot of mindfulness apps, for example, where there's a really high barrier emotionally for users to convert. And actually, a lot of our communications then focus around, reassurance and really driving the confidence of the user. I know as well a lot of those types of apps use stats to show, on average, everyone we polled says we were X% happier than we were previously, and giving that kind of hard evidence is just sometimes the push that users need. So really putting yourself into their shoes is really important. Different kinds of communications work best for different areas. So emails are generally longer form information that you might want to refer back to. Push notifications are more time sensitive, and in-app messages are obviously kind of more nudging the user along the journey in your product. So thinking about those different use cases for each and the different benefits of each channel is really important as well. And then again, we really want to build in A/B testing, making sure that we've tried different options for how this might work for the user. And generally, we also find that using our learnings from things like App Store optimization and user acquisition campaigns are also a really good way to help us understand what users might or might not respond to, right? With user acquisition, you can run 100 creatives at once, and suddenly we have a ton more data on what do users actually care about, what don't they, and what actually brings people into the app. So bringing those learnings into your optimization is really, really effective as well.
Amazing, thank you. So those are the questions that we're able to get to during the session today. We have about 3 or 4 more minutes where we can take some of the questions that people have asked in the chat. I think I saw 2. The first one is, this is actually specific to Yodel's services. Does Yodel have a developer that implements the tools, or do you expect the clients to implement them themselves? We tried to implement One Signal with our developers, so we were interested in how you could do it in 15 minutes or get support through another service.
Yeah, great question. So we do not do any kind of coding in-house, but what we do is really support developers as much as possible. So we're very experienced with working with development teams and helping them to troubleshoot and understand, which parts are really important for us right now and exactly what are the requirements and the scope. I think, it can be really difficult as a developer when you're not familiar with a tool, to understand exactly which parts you need to set up in the initial stages. So that's something that we really help to make easier for our clients. We also have really close partnerships with a ton of the tools on the market. So we can usually, really help to get a little bit of extra support from our partners as well, where, there might be really, really technical questions that we're just not equipped for. But in general, we do help our clients and streamline that process so it's a little bit easier for them.
Great, yeah, and I would add to that that OneSignal does have a support team that's able to work with OneSignal users to help with implementations. They're available and have a lot of great documentation that can help developers go through the implementation process. And then if any help is needed, we have a support team there, as well as a developer relations team, who is able to offer questions about the various OneSignal SDKs as well. So I have another question here that is, how do you successfully plan the a multi-channel strategy using in-app, SMS, push, and perhaps email as well?
Yeah, great question. So I guess, part of this comes back to, as I said, the different advantages of different channels. So, an email, we might want to come back to that. It might not be as time sensitive. A push notification is very time sensitive, but also a little bit intrusive as well. So we don't want to overuse those. And SMS is kind of almost somewhere in the middle. In-app messages are a really interesting one because, what we would often actually use them for is to relieve pressure on developers. There's always a ton of product updates that companies want to make and apps want to make, but there's always a massive developer backlog and can be really hard to prioritize what you're actually looking at. So we'll use them as almost a test. If we actually communicate something to a user at this point in time, how does that impact their overall conversion? And if it works well enough, let's think about building it in officially into our product. But actually, the most effective campaigns are multi-channel. So how can we use all of these advantages together to get the best possible outcome? Maybe we send an email, couple of days later we send a follow-up push notification. If you click on that push notification, you get an in-app message. How can we, as I say, get almost like 2 + 2 = 5, right? Like adding two things together to get an even better result. And really the only way to do that is to test. But I think following up with your users, almost retargeting, is always a really valuable thing to do.
Great, thank you. So it looks like we're at time. I'm going to put up our final slide. Thank you, Megan, so much for answering all these really great questions that the attendees asked. Thank you, Josh, for attending to take care of any OneSignal questions. Really appreciate it. If you'd like to book a free app growth consultation with Yodel Mobile, you can contact them at info@yodelmobile.com. And if you're a OneSignal user who's interested in speaking at a future OneSignal community event about your use of the product and your experience with it, we'd love to hear from you. You can actually email me directly. It's megohearn@onesignal.com. I'll leave this up for just a minute if you want to jot those down. We'll also share this information in the webinar follow-up email. So if you don't have a chance to write it down, you need to run to another meeting, we'll send that to you. So thanks again to our speakers. Thanks again to our attendees. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.